Okay. Okay. Good evening. It's always to me. I'm not sure what word to use. I'm not sure it's exciting. It's like comforting when we get to Parshat Lech Lecha. It's like I'm a little uneasy in Breshit and Noach because I really don't feel much of a connection to all the characters. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person that reads Tanakh very personally, and I feel very much connected to the stories and to the people, but I don't really feel it in Breshit and Noah. And no, I'm sure Adam was wonderful. I'm sure Noah was a nice fellow, but it's only when we get to Avraham that we really start to feel this strong. The Hebrew word is zikah, but in English, I think we'd say this connection that we really feel that this is mishpacha, this is family, and it's like because when you daven, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu Elokei Avraham Elokei Yitzchak Elokei Yaakov, so that this is really very powerful for us to feel that connection. But this year, I really want to spend tonight not so much talking about Avraham Avinu, as much as I want to talk about Eretz Yisrael, because what happens in our parsha is not only the beginning of this connection to Avraham, to the Avot, to our family, to our Alter Zaidi, to our great great grandfather, but we also start to feel this connection to Eretz Yisrael, and Avraham doesn't really become Avraham Avinu until he gets to Eretz Yisrael. So at the top of the page, I have 3 psukim. Usually I only have 1 or 2, but you'll see in a minute why I have these 3. And the first one is the first pasuk in our parsha, V'yama Hashem el Avram. And God speaks to Avram. He hasn't become Avraham yet. That's the end of the parsha. He's still Avram. Lech Licha. Now, this says, go forth from your native land. This is the JPS translation. A lot of people say Lech Licha is go for yourself, that you are going to be the beneficiary of certain things if you follow these instructions. And you have to leave Artzecha, your country, Mimoladetcha, your birthplace, Umi Beit Avicha. And Rashi talks about how they seem to be in reverse order. You have to leave your house before you can leave your community, and only then can you leave your country. But he's talking about, in terms of degree of difficulty. It's easier to leave a country than to leave your hometown, and it's easier to leave your hometown than to leave home. And then he says, El Haaretz, to, I apologize, just 1 second. Sorry, I apologize. To the land that I will show you. So in other words, we don't have an identification of where he's going yet. He is in Ur Kasdim. He's at one end, the southwestern end of what's called the Fertile Crescent. And so he's got no place to go. He can't, if he goes in the other direction, he's certainly going to be in the Gulf of Hormuz. He's going to be in the water, in the ocean. So he has to go north, and then you get all the way up to Haran, where he spent some time, and then you come down south. So you go up following the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then you hit this place called Haran, and then from there, the Fertile Crescent starts to come down southward towards Eretz Yisrael. So he's got no place to go except up and around. So he doesn't know yet exactly where he's going, but he's willing to go without yet knowing where to which country, to which destination he is going to end up. Um, I just want to make one point about this. That is, if you could turn the page way on the back, Netivot Shalom, the Slonim Rebbe, who himself made Aliyah against the wishes of his Rebbe. He becomes, after World War II, the Slonim Rebbe. But the previous Slonim Rebbe, who was his uncle, forbade him from coming to Eretz Yisrael, but he snuck away and came here in the early 30s. Baruch Hashem, because otherwise, like many other Slonim Hasidim, he would have been killed in the Holocaust. And so he was the only survivor of the family to take over the dynasty. And he comes and he loves Eretz Yisrael. He's a tremendous Zionist in that sense, even though very ultra-Orthodox, very Haredi, very Hasidish. But he says something here. It is the last comment on the back side of the page. Netivot Shalom, to the land which I will show you. In Chutz La'aretz, there is only speaking. Avram wouldn't reach, I'm sorry, there's a typo, wouldn't reach the level of seeing until he got to Eretz Yisrael. To the land that I will make you see, because you're only going to truly have the power of sight once you come to Eretz Yisrael, which means prophecies in Chutz La'aretz, at least at this point, were only auditory. You heard them, but you didn't see anything. It's only when he gets to Eretz Yisrael that your eyes are opened up and you can now see. A new dimension is added to Avraham Avinu's spiritual power and strength. Then he says, furthermore, only in Eretz Yisrael would he be shown the trait of what's called individual supervision, hashgacha pratit. Now, it's in Chutz La'aretz. When Jews have a destiny, it's for the entire community. When we're in Eretz Yisrael, we can have personal destiny. So before he left, God's supervision, God's direct connection was more general, but once he gets to Eretz Yisrael, it becomes much more personal, okay? Where his eyes would clearly see God's divine control. We, in Eretz Yisrael, and I think this is true, feel a stronger spirituality. And you know, right now, I know it's not a good time, and I know, my son's been drafted, and many of you have mishpacha, in the army, and in Ashkelon, it's a mess. And I know all of that. But what happened here in Yerushalayim, where things are, Baruch Hashem, quite normal, as opposed to many other places in the country, they've just been putting up flags everywhere. It's like up and down Derech Hebron. All of the poster boards have been, usually they have these luach modaot, they have all these announcements. Now they're flags, and they put up on all of the street posts, and they added more poles along the street. There are flags everywhere. It's like, I know it's a tough time, but we feel things, we see things, and it's different than when you're in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, you watch the news. Here, it's like you don't have to watch the news. You just look around, you talk to people. It's like everybody's in it, and it's very powerful. And the first time that was felt was by Avram. Avram gets to Eretz Yisrael, and he feels something is different. His eyes are opened. He can see when before he could only hear. So furthermore, in Eretz Yisrael would be shown the trait of individual supervision, hashgacha pratit, where his eyes would clearly see God's divine control. That's why the Talmud says that anyone who dwells outside of Yisrael, it is as if they have no God. If you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, your connection to God is so tenuous that you can have times when you don't actually necessarily feel sure that I have this connection, that I do have my God. Only in Eretz Yisrael can we see God's control over every aspect of life. that, when we started saying here in Eretz Yisrael, I mean, I know in Chutz La'aretz they're not going to do it until the first week in December. We started saying Tein Tal Mata Livracha, give rain and dew as a blessing. That's talking about Eretz Yisrael. Now, it's all of these things we pray for. I mean, once in a while you can say a special prayer because the country you live in is having a drought. And I remember people did that in the tri-state area. I think it was in the 90s when there was a big drought, especially in New Jersey, it was worse. And people were davening for rain. But in the normative prayers, when we pray for rain, it's not for, Britain or India or China or America. It's for Eretz Yisrael. It's all based on Eretz Yisrael. So it's like we feel it. We feel it here. And that's why we say only in Eretz Yisrael can we see God's control over every aspect of life. Furthermore, Avram could only reach his full potential. We're going to return to this idea in the Kuzari in probably about 15 minutes. Avram could only reach his full potential and complete greatness in Eretz Yisrael. You can't, and the Kuzari is going to say this similarly, even think of the greatest scholars or spiritual people, the Baal Shem Tov, who, by the way, wanted to come to Eretz Yisrael, but various miraculous things happened and stopped him from getting it. He apparently tried 3 different times, left his area in Eastern Europe to come in, Mezhebaj, and then if miraculous things happened, they had to turn back. But he believed that you should be here. But the Baal Shem Tov would be more spiritual in Eretz Yisrael. Rashi would be greater in Eretz Yisrael. That's the point that we're being told here. We reach a greater percentage of our potential and complete greatness only in Eretz Yisrael. It was here that he received the promises and he consummated the brit. All the early tzaddikim, from the Besht and all of his students, even though they weren't physically in Eretz Yisrael, they were always connected to it. Their eyes were always focused on it, and wherever a person starts to focus, that's where he truly is. So in other words, the great tzaddikim were there, but thinking about here. So we're going to go back to the psukim now. But the first thing is sight. Our spiritual and even physical faculties are somehow greater, more attuned here in Eretz Yisrael. But there are 2 other psukim that I have here. And these 2 psukim are not from chapter 12, the beginning of the Parsha. They're from chapter 13. And these 2 psukim take place right after Lot and all of his branch of the family have separated from Avram Avinu. That Lot goes down to Bikat HaYarden, goes down to the Dead Sea area, which in those days apparently was more fertile than today, and he makes his fortune down there. And we'll return, of course, to that story next week. But he leaves. After he leaves, God again addresses Avram Avinu about Eretz Yisrael. Ki et kol haaretz asher ata ro'eh lecha etnana. He didn't want to tell him that he was going to give him this land while Lot was there. They didn't want Lot to get this impression that he was going to be part of the hereditary line keeping Eretz Yisrael. Then he says, and to your progeny, your offspring, your seed, your DNA is going to have this material place forever. It's you. I couldn't make you that promise while Lot was here, because even though Lot does share some DNA with you, he's a nephew, nevertheless, he's not part of this promise. So only after he leaves can I now tell you you're going to have this land. Now that you're going to have this land, God tells Avram a beautiful, beautiful pasuk. And he says to him, Kum hitalech ba'aretz. Get up, arise, get up, Hitalech ba'aretz. Cause yourself, walk around this land, make yourself go everywhere. La'orcha u'l'rachba, to its length and to its breadth. Ki lacha etnana, because I'm going to give it to you. You should make sure that you go everywhere. It's based on this pasuk that many commentaries say it's a mitzvah. We don't count it as one of the 613, but a lot of commentaries say it's a mitzvah to walk 4 new amot, 4 new cubits, about 2 meters of new place in Eretz Yisrael. Every time you go to a new place in Eretz Yisrael and you walk 2 meters, chalk up another mitzvah. Just walking around the land, and this has always inspired me. And together with Rivka, we love to go on Tiyulim and just walk around places we've never been before here in Eretz Yisrael. It's like in America. We were in America last June. We went to a couple of national parks, very, very beautiful. In America and in every other country, and later we were in Iceland and Norway, and you only go places that you know are picturesque. In Eretz Yisrael, they don't have to be picturesque. In Eretz Yisrael, it's worthwhile, even if it's humdrum, even if it's just a street. Just going someplace you've never been before should excite you, because kum mitalech ba'aretz, walk around the land, go places you've never been before. Now, Rivka and I haven't really done much of the Shvil Eretz Yisrael, the trans-Israel trail that starts in Metula. Nobody's going to Metula these days, unfortunately. Starts in Metula and goes all the way down to Eilat and goes through much of the country. But it's always exciting when we hit a little piece of it, and we just walk a little bit on the trail. That happened also over the summer. We were up in the Tveri area, and we walked just a few steps on the Shvil Eretz Yisrael, and it's like you feel, wow, it wasn't anything exciting. You're like, when you're in Chutz Laretz, you only go to tourist sites. In Eretz Yisrael, everything is of interest. It doesn't have to be a tourist site, even though, Baruch Hashem, there are many very, very beautiful places around the country. So what's so special about Eretz Yisrael? Now, before we take a look at some of the, I apologize, I'm jumping around the sheet this week, because I wasn't sure until about an hour ago. I wasn't sure what order I want to do them in. So we're jumping around. What makes Eretz Yisrael special? Now, before we see some of the traditional positions, I want to share a very untraditional, very controversial position, and it's on the back of the sheet, and it's Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik was an interesting Zionist. He only came to Eretz Yisrael once, and it was he had a very big disappointment, and not with the country. And he got to spend some time with Rav Kook just before he passed. It was a wonderful trip, and he spoke about it many times in later speeches later in life. But it was disappointing because he came to apply for a job as the chief rabbi in Tel Aviv, and it didn't work out. And there are many controversial ideas about how come when he was here they told him he had the job, and then when he got back to Boston to pack up his belongings and of course his family to come back, he got a telegram waiting for him. By the time he got back to Boston by boat, there was a telegram waiting for him and said, no, we gave the job to somebody else, and sorry. And he never came again, even though he was later offered to become the chief rabbi when Rav Herzog died. They made him the offer, and he said, no, I'm too invested here. And so he was always very supportive, officially the head of Mizrahi, is very much into it on a Zionist level, but didn't, had a funny relationship. And, there are a lot of writing out there about it. But he has a fascinating and very controversial position over what's the source of the kedusha, of the sanctity, of the special nature of Eretz Yisrael. Okay. And he says on the backside, next to the bottom commentary, with all my respect for the Rishonim, I must disagree with such an opinion. Now, the Rishonim he brought down opinions from the Kuzari, that we're going to see an opinion of his in a few minutes, and from the Ramban. And he says, I have to disagree with these great scholars from the Middle Ages. I do not believe that it is halachically cogent. I don't believe that their position that the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael came from things that happened at the time of creation. I don't. There are midrashim that say these things. But he said, okay, they're nice midrashim, and they should give us some warm feelings, but it's not the halachic position. It's not the legal basis for the special kedusha, for the special place in Jewish tradition for Eretz Yisrael. Kedusha, in the second line, there's a very powerful sentence. Kedusha under halachic aspect is man-made. More accurately, it is a historical category. A soil is sanctified by historical deeds performed by a sacred people, never by any primordial superiority. So people that want to say that Har HaBayit was where Gan Eden was, or where the world was created from Even HaShtiyah, from the famous rock underneath the dome, the rock from the dome of the rock, that rock, that's the beginning of creation was there. The Rav says that's not important. It may be true, it may not be true, but halachically it's not important. What makes something kadosh? What makes something kadosh is a Jew made it kadosh. I took a piece of paper and I wrote Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and now that piece of paper is holy. Or is it a bracha over a lulav? And now that lulav has some kedusha to it. Kedusha as a halachic phenomenon must be produced, generated by Jews doing things. So the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael came from Avraham coming here and saying, wow, I'm going to make a mizbeach here. I'm going to daven there. I'm going to plant something here. That activity, that is what made Eretz Yisrael kadosh. We made Eretz Yisrael kadosh by conquering it, by building a Beit HaMikdash here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu confirmed it, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu guided Avraham here. But the kedusha comes from us. It's a very interesting. A soil is sanctified by historical deeds performed by a sacred people, never by any primordial superiority. Nothing historical, nothing, that's why we don't know. We don't know where the Jews crossed the Red Sea because we don't really care. We don't know where Har Sinai is because we don't really care, because those places didn't or don't have eternal sanctity. But we do know where the Beit HaMikdash was, with the holy temple was there because we built it. We made it holy. That's significant. The halachic term kedusha ta'aretz, the sanctity of the land, denotes the consequences of a human act, either conquest, heroic deeds, or the mere presence of the people in that land, intimacy of man and nature. Kedusha is identical with man's association with Mother Earth. Nothing should be attributed a priori to dead matter. A rock can't make itself holy. Only a human can. Objective kedusha, saying that something is because of its makeup is kadosh, that smacks of fetishism, of superstition, of magic. We don't believe in any of that. Something is kadosh because holy Jews did something with it, to it, or there. It's a fascinating position. In other words, Avram Avinu could only become Avram Avinu in Eretz Yisrael. There was something that he felt the aura of it, okay? But the Kedusha came from Avram. When he built a Mizbeach in Shechem, that made that area holy. The act of the Akedah in Yerushalayim, the act of giving korbanot in later in Beersheba. It's those acts that make the land holy. Not that the land was holy, we make it holy. It's a fascinating position, very controversial, as I'm sure you can all imagine. And we've said it, and now we're going to sort of ignore it because almost everybody else is talking about other things. But it's a fascinating position. Okay. I'm gonna leave Rev Kook for later. I'm gonna go to the Ramban. The Ramban begins with something very, very famous. So we're back on the first side, second paragraph. Ramban, all who live in Eretz Yisrael resemble someone who has a God. You want to look like you have a God, you have to live in Eretz Yisrael. And all who live outside the land of Israel, their appearance is that of someone who has no God. And that's a Gemara. In Chutz La'aretz, the worship of God only reaches the level of the celestial angels. When I daven, there are 7 levels between physical earth and spiritual heaven. 7 levels, okay? Somewhere on that, on those gradations, on those steps, is where the angels are. I don't know what step it is, okay? But that's as high as prayers get when you daven outside of Eretz Yisrael. When you daven in Eretz Yisrael and you do it well, it can make it all the way to where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is on the 7th level. Whereas in Eretz Yisrael, divine service is direct to God himself. This is almost like the famous joke that was told many. There are many versions of it, that all these world leaders try to call God, and they say, "Oh, it cost me $1 million. It cost me $10 million to call God." And then finally, the Israeli Prime Minister says, "Oh, so for me, it's only a dime to call Eretz Yisrael, to call God from Eretz Yisrael, because in Eretz Yisrael it's a local call." And it was a famous joke, but the Ramban, to a certain extent, is giving credence to that joke. It's not a joke, it's a reality. Talking to God in Eretz Yisrael is a local call. And outside of Eretz Yisrael requires a lot more effort on our part. And that's why our sages said, when you're outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's almost like you don't have a God, because it's so hard to contact Hashem. Well, in Eretz Yisrael, it's like you do have a God, because it's so easy to contact God. The Vilna Gaon. Now, the Vilna Gaon, very much like the Besht, even though he lived over 100 years later, also tried to come to Eretz Yisrael. He left Vilna around 1765, if my memory is correct, and he went across Western Europe to go to the Atlantic, where he was going to get a boat to take him, a ship to take him to Eretz Yisrael. So he made it through Poland and into Germany, and he made as far as Holland, and then we're not sure exactly what happened. And he turned back. There's a lot of speculation why he turned back and what happened. Some people think that he had this belief that Mashiach was going to come, and he wanted to be there. And then something happened in Holland to convince him that it wasn't the correct time. So he went back to Vilna. We're not sure. Just speculation. But his connection to Eretz Yisrael is therefore very, very strong. And this is his comment on what there is about that. In the land of Israel, we are a living people. In the diaspora, we are like bodies lacking spirit. We're like a fossil. The physical shell of a people without inner life. Since the temple was destroyed, our spirit and our crown have departed, and only we remained, the body without the soul. And exile to outside of the land is a grave. Worms surround us there, and we do not have the power to save ourselves. In other words, the ability of Jews on a regular basis to defend themselves. I'm not saying that there can't be an individual Jew, somewhere that can take a gun and kill an assailant, but for the people to truly hold their destiny in their hands and really be able to control the environment and to defend themselves with their own army and their own resources, that can only happen in Eretz Yisrael. That only happens in Eretz Yisrael. So outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's another way of saying we're like a shell of ourselves outside. Now, the Chatam Sofer, who again is one of the founders of the Haredi movement, he may be the founder of non-Hasidic Haredi position, and he lived just into the beginning of the 1800s, 19th century. Really active in the 18th century, and he never came to Eretz Yisrael, but there were many of his followers here, especially here in Yerushalayim, regarding someone who builds a big house of stone unnecessarily in the diaspora in order to have more space, and will despair of the redemption coming. In this manner, his building is a danger and not a precept which will protect him. He's against building mansions in Chutz La'aretz. I shouldn't tell that to real estate agents in New Jersey or the tri-state area. A lot of very large houses have gone up in Teaneck and Englewood and Five Towns, but he felt that's a bad idea. And I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, I spent some time in America working with NCSY. And I went to a lot of yeshiva high schools, mostly in the South, almost entirely in the South, although I hit a couple in the North, but I was mostly in Miami, Atlanta, Houston. And I would speak to the high school kids, and I would always ask the teachers and the principals to leave the room. And I'd talk to the kids about Mashiach, and I'd ask them, how many of you really would like Mashiach to come tomorrow? And vast majority of these modern Orthodox kids, without their parents there, without their teachers there, said, I would really prefer that Mashiach not come. And when I would ask them why, my best answer was from a girl on Miami Beach who said, I think I'd have to give up my Beamer. And I didn't know what a Beamer was. And so everybody goes, oh, it's a BMW. She had just gotten a BMW for her 16th birthday, and she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to fly that over to Eretz Yisrael. She said, I'd rather not Mashiach come because I don't want to lose my BMW, my Beamer. It's a fascinating answer, and it's what the Chatam Sofer is saying. Don't build big fancy mansions, because when you do that and you really feel comfortable and you really feel this kind of connection to Chutz La'aretz, it's not going to be so easy for you to make Aliyah, and therefore maybe it's not such a good idea. Live more simply in Chutz La'aretz and save that money so you can come to Eretz Yisrael and buy an overpriced apartment here in Yerushalayim. Okay. The price of an apartment in Yerushalayim tends to buy mansions in other places in the world. So it sort of works out. But it's a fascinating position. View your stay in Chutz La'aretz as temporary, and therefore don't lay down those deep roots that mansions and fancy cars may indeed engender. Now, the most famous of the Rishonim for his Zionist views was, of course, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is most famous for his poetry, his beautiful, beautiful poetry, much of it praising the beauty and the wonders of Eretz Yisrael. Tzion, 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 Halo Tishali, Lishloma Siraich. But he also is famous for being a philosopher that wrote the Kuzari. Kuzari is a semi-fiction work about what may have been a true historical event, where this entire country converts to Judaism, and there's a rabbi that comes and meets with the king of the Khazars and convinces him that the best religion is Judaism. But remember, he's a tremendous Zionist. So in this philosophic work, talking to these people that lived in the Ukraine, actually, the capital of the Khazar Empire was Kiev, and talking to me, he says, he first talks about why Eretz Yisrael is so important, and then we're going to see what the Kuzari said to him that got him really upset. Okay, how about the hill on which you say that the vines thrive so well? Okay, so you said, there are certain places that are good for planting grapes. There are certain places that are good for planting olives. No other place would share the distinction of the divine influence, just as no other mountain might be able to produce that good wine. In other words, Eretz Yisrael is special. Just like some places are special for wine, Eretz Yisrael is special for Kedusha, for sanctity, for spiritual growth. Was not Avram also, after having been greatly exalted, brought into contact with the divine influence and made the heart of his essence, removed from his country to the place in which his perfection should become complete? As great as Abraham was, he couldn't become his full, total self outside of Eretz Yisrael. Only in Eretz Yisrael could he truly, if I can quote a famous movie line, only in Eretz Yisrael could he fulfill his destiny. And there's a certain truth to that, obviously. Then he talks about the king of the Khazars says to him, but look at all the Jews living in Chutz La'aretz. Why don't you guys go to Eretz Yisrael? By the way, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who lived in Spain, eventually did come to Eretz Yisrael. He died very soon after arriving. There's actually a tale that he was killed immediately upon seeing Har HaBayit by an Arab knight who killed him with a spear. We're not sure if that story is true, but we do know that soon after he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, he made it to Yerushalayim and did die soon after. But the king of the Khazars says, how come you Jews aren't coming to Eretz Yisrael? How come you're living in Spain and you're living in, here and there, and a lot of Jews there in North Africa and in Iraq called Bavel. And so to his response to when the king said that is, this is a severe reproach, O king of the Khazars. It is the sin which kept the divine promise with regard to the second temple. The second temple never became what it could have been because the Jews didn't come. Only about 20% of the Jews of Bavel made Aliyah. Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, it says in Zechariah, from being fulfilled. They didn't end up singing and rejoicing. They had tough times here because not enough people came. Divine providence was ready to restore everything as it had been at first in the first temple under Shlomo HaMelech. But it didn't happen. It would have happened if they had all willingly consented to return, but only a part was ready to do so, while the majority and the aristocracy, the filthy rich, remained in Babylon, preferring dependence and slavery. Someone said, how could you say I'm a slave? I'm wealthy. Well, you're a slave to your wealth. Your wealth is more important than making aliyah. That's a form of slavery. Freedom is following the dictates of the Torah, fulfilling the Torah's concepts and mitzvah, and unwilling to leave their houses and their affairs. The sentence, my beloved stretches forth his hand through the opening. The Dodi is trying to come into the garden where the beloved is, right? May be interpreted as the urgent call of Ezra, Nehemiah, and the prophets until a portion of the people grudgingly responded to their invitation. In accordance with their mean mind, they did not receive full measure. Because they didn't come in their large numbers, the second aliyah under these people, under Ezra and Nehemiah, was not that successful. Divine providence only gives man as much as he is prepared to receive. That's a beautiful line. Divine providence only gives man as much as he is prepared to receive. In spirituality, we're not talking about wealth. We're talking about in spirituality. If his receptive capacity be small, because he's more involved in this worldly things and not in making aliyah, he obtains little, and much if it be great. If he's truly spiritually connected, wow, he'll get a lot of it. Were we prepared to meet the God of our forefathers with a pure mind, and we should find the same salvation as our fathers did in Egypt. If we say, worship his holy hill, worship at his footstool, he who restores his glory to Zion. And other words such as this is but the chattering of a starling and the nightingale. In other words, when we daven and say beautiful things about Eretz Yisrael, but we're living in the diaspora, it's just like it's like a parrot. It doesn't mean anything. We're saying the words, but we're not connected to the words because we say them and we don't mean them because we're not thinking about coming. We do not realize what we say by this sentence. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva. Right, we don't know what it means, nor others, as you rightly observe, O Prince of the Khazars, that Jews in Chutz La'aretz are living, a certain lie, that there is that there is something in their davening which doesn't ring true, because they say these things, but they're not really committed to the concepts. That we should yachad oleh le'eretz Yisrael. It's very sad. And when you look at aliyah to Eretz Yisrael since 1948, since Hakamat HaMedina, since the beginning of the state, you'll notice a very sad statistic. Almost 90% of the olim who came to Eretz Yisrael came from countries in trouble. It's like 88, almost all. The first wave, of course, came from the Muslim countries, North Africa, Iraq, Yemen. Then, later, people came from Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. The big wave in the 90s. Well, only approximately 10% came from successful Western democracies, from countries like Great Britain and France, Germany, America, Canada. The numbers are very small. And it's because it's very hard. It's very hard to leave these things behind. I can't tell anyone that they should make aliyah. You can't. But I can say, if for some reason you can't make aliyah, you should feel bad about it at least. You should really feel like something's missing in your life. I know people leave, a 2-foot square unfinished piece in their house. That's not enough. That unfinished piece can't just be on the wall. It's got to be in your heart and in your mind. And you really have, sometimes you can't come. I mean, there are reasons. I have responsibilities. I have family. I have whatever. And making aliyah is very, very hard. If you don't make it, fine. I understand that, but you should feel bad. You should really feel like something is lacking, not just on your wall decoration. Something's lacking in your heart and in your soul. It's very, very important to feel that way. Okay, we have one more comment that we're going to take a look at, and that's the Kli Yakar. Now, the Kli Yakar lived in the beginning of the 1600s, being 17th century, in Prague. He was the successor of the Maharalmi Prague as the chief rabbi of Prague. And although he didn't come, he sent a number of his students and some of his family did come. And it wasn't easy to come in the 1600s. It seems to me, from all this, that one can say that the Holy One gave the land to Avraham in order that he acquire there 2 types of benefits. The first is spiritual, and that's obvious. The first benefit of living in Eretz Yisrael is spiritual, that you feel something here that you don't feel in other places. It's just, it's just easier to daven here. I mean, we daven in a park. It's like, and the park is facing this way, it was over this way, because everybody knows exactly where Har Habayit is. So everybody is facing exactly where the Temple Mount is, and it's like, and that's just, and well, people, where were you this morning? Oh, I walked to the Kotel. And I know people aren't walking to the Kotel now during this wartime situation. People who want to stay close to home and be concerned walking through Arab neighborhoods. I understand, but I mean, it's a wonderful thing, and you buy fruit here, and you make sure Trumas is nice with. I mean, everything is everything has Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, and it's very, very special. So the first is spiritual, and it's acquired simply through seeing. Just looking at it, you begin to feel it. The other is physical, and is acquired through marking out its boundaries. In other words, when Avram Avinu, HaKadosh Baruch said, "Kum italech ba'aretz," get up and walk around the land. That physical act was significant. It was a physical acquisition. By the way, one of the kinyanim you can make on land is that you bought it, but it's not yours until you put up a fence or you walk through it. You have to actually, you're in it, you're living it. The other is physical and is acquired through marking out its boundaries. The spiritual benefit is that there is the place of the sanctuary below, aligned with the holy temple above. When you go to Har Habayit, what's important isn't the temple down here. It's the fact that it's in perfect alignment directly above it to the temple in heaven. There the Lord made a place for his dwelling, and there was his strength hidden. This is almost like the world to come. Now, he didn't come here. He's writing this in Prague, but he's saying there's something about going to Eretz Yisrael. It's like getting a little piece, a chelek, a little portion of olam above, the world to come, because there too the righteous sit and take pleasure in the radiance of his presence. We feel more Shekhinah, divine presence here, than is felt elsewhere. God indicated directly that this spiritual perfection, which is acquired through sight, remember, you're going to get there, and then, Areka, I'm going to show it to you, because only then will you be able to really see. When you're in Chutz La'aretz, you're living in blinders. Only there do you really get the full aspect of your ability to see things, especially divine presence. God indicated directly that this spiritual perfection, which is acquired through sight, only be acquired by him from the place which he stood, which was Beit El. This is what is implied by the plain meaning of the verse, and he went on his journeys from the south until Beit El. This is also what is meant to the land that I will show you there. For this reason, you will see the king in his beauty with your own eyes. It's only here that you really perceive the kedusha, the sanctity, that isn't just the land, but is the connection to Hashem. And these days, with the difficulties, how's that for a euphemism? With the difficulties that we're going through, and the tragedies all around us, it's worth the sacrifice because it's our land. It's, my father fought, in World War II, and, many Jews fought and many died for countries throughout the world. And their sacrifice was worth it because, they were making the world safe for democracy, and they were, fighting evil, and all of that was wonderful. But here, it's a Kiddush Hashem. There it was a worthwhile sacrifice, but it wasn't necessarily dying al Kiddush Hashem, dying as a martyr for for the sanctity of God in this world. And that's something that we have to be aware of, and we have to remind ourselves. And we find tremendous inspiration for people, both Israelis and non-Israelis, who have come to volunteer and to help, and also the donations. But the real sacrifice is we want everybody to be here. We wouldn't have a lot of our demographic problems with the Arabs surrounding us if the Jews just came. I remember in 1967, initially we wanted immediately to give back Gaza, Yehuda and Shomron, and the Golan. We wanted to give everything back. We said, for peace, we'll give it all to you. And then a month after the war, there was a meeting of Arabs and Islamic states in Khartoum, and there was the famous three no's, no to peace, no to compromise, and no to exchange of land. It was we couldn't give it back. It was only after the three no's of Khartoum that the government said, and it was Golda Meir said it, Aleha Shalom. Maybe it's good that we keep Yehudim Shomron because we have this land. The Jews will come and fill it. Nice dream, but it didn't really happen. It's a problem. It's a problem that the demographics are working against us here in Eretz Yisrael, and more than anything else that we need from the Jews of Chutz La'aretz is the Jews from Chutz La'aretz. Even though we thank them for all their support and their help and their wishes, and we look at the videos from programs being held in day schools and shoals and community centers, and we love it, and it's wonderful, but it's all about kum hitalech ba'aretz. It's all, come on, all of us, let's walk the land together and really fulfill Abraham's dream of his family, his Zara, his progeny, his DNA living here in Eretz Yisrael, in all those places that he visited so many years ago. Okay. Thank you all very much for coming. I know we don't have such a big crowd tonight. I understand that. And, our hearts and our support go out to Ashkelon, because here in Yerushalayim, things are normal, more or less, and not true in Ashkelon, that's for sure. But I'll have the recording up, please God, by the morning, and I'll be sending it out. But thank you for coming. And Gail, you're very welcome. Gail, enjoy your visit in the States.
Have a safe trip.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.